arms are really sore from arm day yesterday. Okay. Alright. Well, instead of just posting this, I'm gonna ask Sultan of Sesh, is my audio working? Can you hear me right now? Can you write in the chat if you can hear me? Great. Okay, so I'm just gonna go live instead of doing a test one. So hello, it's me, DayLife Mary. I'm in better spirits than the last time I went live, you know? And I am continuing, I guess this is part 3 on closing the door on being cool, or chasing clout, whatever you want to call it. Coolness, satanic success. And it's really hard for me to talk about this one. I don't know. It's like my mind goes in a million places, and instead of just talking about and getting all meta about it, I'll just go into it. But as usual, before I get into it, this is all I do, all these lives, everything is sponsored by the one and only Automat. And if you have not heard by now, the Automat is where you send dirty money to be washed into PleasureMatrux expansion. So there's a few places you store your belief, but for most people, primarily it's in their money. And you circulate belief in the pain matrix by circulating that belief. You know, currency, current passing around, creating a reality, making the pyramid come together. So washing is how you transfer that belief into PleasureMatrux expansion. It's how you get back soul in the process. And it's kind of fitting to talk about that during this live, because a lot of the scenes and people and groups, etc., that I'm going to be bringing up and talking about made a very conscious decision to really sell that soul for Satan's promises of lots of different things, and we know how deals like that work. There's always a hidden cost, and it's like the movie Bedazzled with Brendan Fraser. It never works out like you want it to, and you become more and more of a demon, more than the human that the demon then kind of takes over and runs, and all that good stuff. So washing belief is a way to start to reclaim that soul, that either you are not in possession, claiming sovereignty over, or perhaps you've sold it to some demon or thing or Satan himself. So you can send washes of belief to cash.me/$washitall, paypal.me/washitall. You can DM me for crypto links, etc., etc. You know the deal. So I left off last time and I was talking about $1 Million Extreme, Sam Hyde's project that was on Adult Swim back in like 2015 or whatever. And I was talking about how like I came to DLA and was attracted to the people who ran it because they just did not give a fuck about satanic success, and in fact like disavowed it. And I could tell that it was a place that was just, it was a different matrix, that like I had become really fed up with the scenes that I was in. And particularly, I was in Chicago, and like the guy I was seeing was part of the alt-lit scene. And something that really attracted me about DayLife Army is back in like 2014 and 2015 on Facebook, on Weird Facebook, they were talking about how that scene was completely created and held together by literal ops. And that you can't trust a fucking anime profile pic on Facebook. These are not the people you think they are, and they are grooming you, and this scene is not what you think it is, etc., etc. So they talked about military intelligence in a way that I had not seen people talk about, especially in the hipster scene, etc. And this kind of dovetails into what initially attracted me and why I was tricked, really, and let myself be tricked, opened the door, so to speak, to MDE and the Sam Hyde crew. Because when I came here, I was still mesmerized by satanic success, and I was still mesmerized by clout. And because I was still mesmerized by those things, Edan, you know, DayLife Jesus's successes in that satanic matrix impressed me. He was still caught up in some of those things, even though coming here to DayLife Army, you wash your belief out of that shit, and it is painful, and it is a process. So, like, him and this other soldier had not washed their belief out of that enough, and they were showing me MDE and Sam Hyde, and I was, like, as usual, a little late to shit, but I was not late to this phenomenon of conspiracy becoming clouded up and edge posting and schizo posting and whatever, going into the latest reference that hipsters collect to signal coolness or whatever. It's like they're underground bands, they don't want anyone to know. It's like, oh, you know about this or that or whatever. And that is just a completely scripted in part of the story called full disclosure, getting you know, the underground and hipsters and whatever to start talking about different things that are just going to be allowed to come to light or whatever. And that's why the earliest conspiracy influencers, they're all government shows, you know. There's a reason, there's a play being played out. I'm getting off topic though. So I was looking up this shit with them, and I was like, I was tricked by these people, these Sam Hydes, these Charles Carrolls, these Nick Rochefords. I was like, oh, they're like kind of subversive, and they're like talking about real shit. And it was just like, usually the people that talked about real shit were like somewhat obscure, crazy people on the internet, like Quasi-Luminous or Jade Dreamers, or like these are just people like a reference, like I'm just spouting references, right? Like David Icke or whatever. It was just, for me, I was like, my people talking about this, like my people, horrible people basically. But I was like kind of, I had my door open to satanic shit still, so I was like, I cared about and like thought they were cool and respected them almost. And they're like the first tendril in this like story that I'm telling, that, by the way, is a Twitter thread on my Twitter, Duchess O DayLife, and it's also in the Butter Telegram channel. I have like an essay about this, but my live's going deeper, and I'm like wading through this story. It's really hard for me to tell, but so they showed me their shit, and I was looking at it, and there was this particular video that Sam Hyde did where he called up, or was being on the phone with Joe Bernstein, Blockhead Joe, as the video, as he calls him in the video. And Joe Bernstein is a BuzzFeed journalist, pinnacle of media in the United States. And the video is just Sam basically trolling him, and you know, there's some convincing shit. I was like, yeah, he's like talking about how journalists are fucking stupid, and I'm into it. And it was Joe Bernstein basically was like setting the stage for giving Sam Hyde some particular clout to this burgeoning scene of the underground that at that point was being called all sorts of things, but which has like gotten all tied up together, and I'm gonna call the outpouring kind of that gentrifying scene's gentrified scene that it like led to being able to be created and capture the minds of the young, the dirtbag left, right? Or like these kind of what people call it's not exactly alt-right, it's not like the Q people, it's like the hipsters who are like in Brooklyn but also know about like MK Ultra, and like they know that, you know, 9/11 was an inside job. And yeah, this interview is basically like at the point where MDE is getting taken off the air, further solidifying them as like having this certain clout or whatever. And I just thought it was funny. I shared it with, I think, even with Wiz and Koa here, and like, I think they probably held their tongue, but they were just like, interesting. And fast forward to a little bit later, and if you know the timeline of DayLife Army when it was doing its like IRL boot camp with all the people, if you know that timeline, around the time that a ton of people were, well, not a ton because there was only a handful of people ever IRL, but around the time that a lot of people were leaving, this certain NYC Underground scene that has been keeping tabs on DayLife Army for a long time, was seeding the beginning of this, like, cancellation, and Boom's demon really, really dove headfirst into this, part of the NYC Underground, moved there, started doing shit with these people, and there's a mixture of people there that are idiots and retarded and don't know the tools they are being used as and by whom, and I would probably count Boom among those people, like taking money from contracted governmental shit and not really questioning like who it is or what's happening, probably not realizing who funds the milady scene and what is up higher up on the pyramid, basically. It's all hidden cults, right? Like, people respect in PleasureMatrux the hidden cults that don't tell you who their leaders are, that don't tell you the agendas, that don't tell you the secret, dirty, gross, satanic shit that they're up to. But there are certain key figures in that scene that totally do know what they're doing, who are tasked with certain things, and who are very aware of the fucked up shit they're perpetrating. Walter Pierce comes to mind of Midland Agency and his former business partner Rachel Chandler. That connection is with Hood by Air, which the general of this army, they know of her and have had her in their sights and DayLife Army in their sights far before I came here. What happens with traffickers, sex traffickers, child traffickers, people dealing in things like adrenochrome and drugs, money, and bodies, really, and all that shit. Anyone that they think of as competition or as someone that they could potentially buy out and contract to do their shit or blackmail or whatever, or people that are just talking about that shit and are not doing that shit, there's surveillance everywhere. So DayLife Army is a life cult, not a death cult. We have never dealt in bodies or drugs or any of these things that you would potentially be probably more successful and play a certain role if you did deal in those things. So I'm not sure. Who knows? Getting on the radar because you're checking or sniffing us out to see if that's what we are actually about, and then saying, oh, they're just something else entirely, and perhaps that being even more threatening or whatever, to potentially capture the attention of bodies to feed to the satanic pipeline and divert them out of that could also be a reason. So anyways, though, that scene is something that I was aware of and following because of those connections and because of Boom. The first podcast Boom went on to like do his cancel tour of DLA was a very small podcast in Brooklyn in the underground, or at least based out of NYC Underground scene. But the thing about that shit is you're like, oh, tiny little inconsequential podcast, but I can do 4 degrees of separation, maybe perhaps 3, to literally Bill Clinton and like flight logs through that podcast, right? And I'm not saying everyone that's on that podcast knows that, but some very key people do. So that scene is going on. They're watching DayLife Army. I'm being interested in certain scenes of people connected to that scene or who perhaps helped seed that seems like a whole way of approaching and talking about conspiracy and what people use for cloud and signaling cloud, etc., etc. And I just want to be clear, all of those people are making decisions to, and it just seems so stupid, but it's so powerful, to be cool. Oh, I hope I'm not lagging my connection. I'm gonna get out of the sun. Maybe that'll help. I don't want to lose this live.